Welcome to the Retail Code. We help retail leaders accelerate profitability, resilience, and competitive advantage. My name is Liza Amlani, principal and founder of the Retail Strategy Group, where we help retailers optimize organizational effectiveness in areas such as product creation, line planning, and merchandising to get closer and faster to the customer. This is Gary Newbury. Gary, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Lisa. I work with board and business leaders to navigate disruption and reinvigorate supply chain performance. We've seen a huge amount of reports over the last few months about potential shelf shortages. We're here today to get underneath the skin on this, to kind of demystify some of the issues that are going on, to try and get some grounding as to whether or not this exists as a real problem for retailers. And we may look at different areas of retail, the big ones, the small ones, in between, whatever, to try and work out who is it a problem for besides consumers if it actually materializes ahead of the holidays. So I don't know if you have any immediate views you've got to kick us off.
I think what's been interesting is how the media has been portraying supply chain disruption, what's happening with the government and leadership, and how in some cases they're targeting the Targets and Walmarts of the world to take more ownership of helping to clear some of those ports and increase peak and non-peak performance through those ports. So just getting through that traffic jam, and that is some of the chaos that's being caused by this supply chain disruption. I think also getting into the root of why this is happening. And yes, of course, everyone wants to save Christmas. That is top of mind, especially as a lot of these retail experts and analysts are expecting customers to spend so much more. But if the shelves are empty, how are we going to navigate that? Not only as retailers, but also as customers.
The Retail Dive report was, and I can't remember the consulting group that was behind this, because they all have their brand, but I saw something extraordinary. It said something like 25% increase year on year, holiday to holiday period.
Yeah, I saw that too.
That's crazy. I know that in the US, in Canada, we've had different levels of government support for people between things or on furlough, but I don't think if we can imagine 25%, what are we spending 25% more on this year than we were last year? I thought last year would have been a pretty good reason to rush out onto Amazon or wherever and do your revenge spending, retail therapy, call it what you like. Now the report was saying another 25%. I think that there's quite a lot of fear mongering going on to stir up people. And I don't know if between the headlines, if retailers are kind of encouraging the media to continue to project this image that there are going to be massive shortages. You need to go out now, because that would be somewhat counterintuitive with their promotional schemes. Because if they actually genuinely believe there was going to be stock shortages, inventory problems, then they would get full margin, wouldn't they? They'd probably get super normal margins because they wouldn't have to discount anything.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, that's an interesting tactic from a marketing point of view, but I think that media has a lot to do with it, with the whole concept around panic buying and what's happening with limiting the amount of purchases, I think is all tying into that. But at the end of the day, from a merchant perspective, we have, let's say, a 3-month ship window. So as soon as a merchant planner supply chain team starts to see that factories have, called the freight forwarder or started to book space on a ship, then that's when we start to panic, right? Because we're like, okay, are the shelves actually going to be empty? What are we going to do to fill that space? And how do we really truly break down those silos of communication to talk to the visual merchants, to talk to the sales teams, to build better relationships with the customer, and to help them as customers understand that, product may not be here when you want it, but how do we as retailers change the way that we communicate with the customer and stop that panic buying? I'm not sure how to do that. Breaking down silos is such an easy thing for us to say, but I mean, retailers, we don't like change, right? So it's difficult to to action, breaking down those silos of communication and not only expediting product somehow, I'm not sure how because everything is booked up and ports are slammed, but how do we really change the customer's mindset? I think that's what it also, in balance with, of course, breaking down those silos of communication.
Yeah. What struck me and has gone out in the public perception is Robin Lee of Lee Valley Tours, and I think it was reported through CTV, saw the letter firsthand via contact. Hey, look at this, which basically said we're experiencing problems. It was an honest account of where they are, which is great. But it was an underlining of media messaging out there, which was some of our stuff that you would normally expect to be on the shelf, we're actually having a problem getting. Sometimes it may be up to a year, and sometimes our suppliers are not even taking the order. And on top of that, inevitably, prices are going to rise. It was in some ways a honest, apologetic kind of situation, because Lee Valley is quite a customer-focused, service-natured organisation. It was a family business for a long time. So we've got that, and we've got the media nudging people, because bearing in mind we've been in a degree of fear for the last 18 months, so we've become accustomed to rushing out and doing things that people are telling us to do. But I was recently on a discussion with Rethink Retail, and I actually said, whatever you do, just calm down, just be patient, trust retailers will try their best. It's in their interest to get stock on the shelf. They will find some way of getting stock on the shelf. And it may not be the stuff exactly you want, but there might be an alternative that will do it during this period of time. But to your point of panic buying, there was an interesting statistic I read coming from the first lockdown, which we had particularly in Ontario, but it was reflective of the UK market. The panic buying, or the excess demand, broke down into two areas. Something like 3% of the consumers that went into stores literally grabbed everything off their shelves and shoved it into a trolley, and probably did that several times during the day, especially toilet roll and pasta and flour. I just grabbed it. So I literally did go out their way to clear the shelves off. But for me, I would normally go to my local grocer, which is Sobeys. I would go in there once every 10 days, and I'd have a fairly good shop. But what I was doing was going there twice as often during that period, and also advancing purchases. Now, 97% of the people broadly fell into that category. So that's where the real demand came from. Is everyone just going, I'll go off more often, and I'll also just grab a few extra things which I'd naturally buy in a month, 2 months' time, but I'll just advance it now because I'm not sure how long this might last. So we have to guard against that 97%, because that is really a huge amount of potential demand or replenishment that retailers have to find a way of fixing. And then you're quite right to say that the congestion of getting stuff from, say, the Far East through the port system, their end, this end, and then get it onto a rail car, and they're having issues because not only are they overcapacity, I should say, actually getting it from the port to the railhead. That's where the big issue is, not enough truck drivers. So it makes you wonder when they say we're going to run the port of Los Angeles overnight 24/7, how are we going to find all those drivers? They're not there now. And there's a little piece of legislation in California which said about 18 months ago, you can't be a contractor as a truck driver. So most people just went off and either joined another company as an employee or just left the industry. So there's accumulating problems on this whole end-to-end, let's call it logistics, of ordering and getting your product to the shelf. And the question is, what are the items which are highly sensitive during this period of time, which help retailers to make their profitability work during this, during Q4, which is normally their most profitable quarter?
Yeah, I think there's also a disconnect to what people are panic buying and where things are being manufactured, because when we think back to early 2020 or the beginning of the pandemic's panic buying rage, toilet paper, right, was part of it. But a lot of the toilet paper is actually made locally. So if you think about panic buying and what people were actually buying, it doesn't make sense with the congestion at the port, for example. So I think what we need to do as retailers, retail experts, and people on the other side of the consumer is think about what is happening at the factories to really understand, is it a raw material challenge? Is it a resource challenge? Because the reality is that COVID-19 is still impacting and closing factories. So how is that feeding into that challenge around manufacturing product, sourcing product, and also obviously getting it overseas and to the, let's call it the mainland. But I think that there's a lot more to it than, number one, what the media is saying, and number two, what the consumer is thinking, how they should react to this supply chain disruption that they're reading about. And this was a very interesting question that was brought up to me last week with a friend of mine, and she's based in New York, and she's like, Liza, I see that, in the news, there's so much around supply chain chaos and shelves are going to be empty. But to be honest, I'm in New York and the shelves look full. So what's going on? And she was specifically talking about now with footwear, working in that space. I'll tell you that it takes a longer time to get a lot of those great footwear brands from concept to actually into the store, into market. The one thing to note is about prioritizing stores. So New York is a hub. It's a fashion hub. It's also a retail priority. So a lot of the flagships are there. When we think about merchandising and allocating a product, those stores are actually being filled more quickly than your C and D stores that are in your suburbs in the Midwest, or in Canada and Alberta, for example. We're filling stores in Toronto and New York and LA and Miami versus those smaller cities. So it's the people in the suburbs that are actually going to feel this a little bit more. But what's happening is we're taking a lot of excess and aged inventory and filling some of those shelves. So that's another thing to note, that you may see something that you would have seen last year, or maybe not, because stores were closed. So there's a lot of nuances that are happening, but it seems to me that the media is covering only one variable out of this whole big picture. Yeah. And we're just talking about ports, and we're just talking about the labor shortage around truckers or staff within a DC. And, we have a big problem in those areas, absolutely. But that's what even the government is focusing on. If you see, what the reports around the State of the Union address, and how they want to get, everyone in a room, and including those private organizations, the Targets and Walmarts of the world, to help solve this problem.
Thanks everybody for tuning in.
You can find both Gary and I on LinkedIn or theretailcode.ca. Have a great day.
We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Hit the like button and leave your comments. Connect with us on LinkedIn to get the heads up on future episodes of The Retail Code.